Hey everybody, Some Gadget Guy here, and it is finally time to wrap up our long-term review of the Lumia 1320 here on Cricket in the United States. We've been playing with this phone for a little over a month, so let's see what you get with Nokia's budget phablet. Now, the 1320 is something of an in-betweener. It was developed at that time that we were starting to move over into quad-core processors on phones like the Lumia 1520, but Microsoft was still supporting phones like the Lumia 925 using dual-core processors. As such, the guts and specs on the 1320 are going to be very similar to the internals on phones like the Lumia 1020, 925, and 920. But the big feature here is bringing a 6-inch screen to a budget phablet. So let's get into some size comparisons. Here's the 1320 opposite the Lumia 1020 with a 4.5-inch screen. Here's the 1320 next to a Lumia Icon/930 with a 5-inch screen. For those of you in Android land, here's a 5.1-inch screened Galaxy S5 next to the Lumia 1320. But the 1320 is most definitely a phablet, so let's compare it to the Galaxy Note 4 with a 5.7-inch screen. And it's phones like this that actually make the Galaxy Note feel kinda not that big anymore. So if we're going to compare it to another phone, we should probably check out another 6-inch screened display, like the one found on the LG G Flex. And lastly, we have the 1320's big brother, the Lumia 1520. And it's here where we can actually start our discussion on build, hardware, and ergonomics. I actually prefer the rounded corners on the 1320 over the sharper, more pointy corners on the 1520. This is a little easier to hold on to thanks to these rounded corners, which fit a little bit easier and don't quite dig into the pad of your palm while you're trying to hold the device one-handed. And if you caught my video comparing the 1520 with the LG G Flex, that was actually one of my favorite things about the G Flex, in that I found this phablet to be a little easier to use while out and about. Walking around the hardware, this is a pretty normal Lumia. On this front face, we've got a front-facing camera that's only capable of shooting VGA video. It's one of the cost-saving measures in bringing the price on this puppy down. And we've got capacitive buttons down here at the bottom for back, home, and Cortana. On the right side of the phone is where we'll find all of the buttons, the power button, volume rocker, and the dedicated camera button. This was definitely built before Windows 8.1 supported on-screen controls. As such, we have the dedicated hardware for the camera button, which you won't find on newer phones like the Lumia 630. The top of the phone is where we'll find our headphone jack. The bottom of the phone is where we'll find our micro USB port. And then the back of the phone is where we'll find the 1/4-inch 5-megapixel shooter, which is capable of 30 frame per second 1080p video, and the rear firing speaker. And I've already produced both a camera review and a speaker test, so you can definitely check both of those videos on this channel as well. Now, one of my favorite features on the 1320 is simply Nokia's build quality and design. It's a bright, bold, colorful aesthetic with a matte plastic finish. On first blush, I doubt there would be many people who would consider this a budget device just based on looks alone. We're moving into that area where manufacturers like Nokia, LG, Motorola are doing a much better job of not punishing the consumers who are shopping entry-level and mid-range gear. So even for those of us who are power users, and when we see these two phones side by side, we know that the 1520 is a much more powerful machine and that it's going to be a more expensive phone. But pulling this phone out of a pocket or a purse, it's going to make a bold statement, and I doubt there would be many people who would look at that and think, oh, well, that must be a cheap, inexpensive phone. If they're going to be critical about anything at all, it's the fact that this is a farging huge phone. You're likely to get a sideways glance because of the size, but not because people think you might have cheaped out. Nokia and Microsoft have paved tremendous inroads in smartphones at the entry and budget levels of the market. Windows Phone is very efficient, so even though this is rocking an older dual-core processor, it's still a very snappy experience navigating through the operating system in the UI. And at this ridiculously low price point for such a large phone, Nokia is not asking too many compromises. Features like Tap to Wake still function even at this budget price point. This phone is going to ship with Windows Phone 8, but I got impatient and loaded the developer preview to bump this up to Windows Phone 8.1 Update 1, and performance has been pretty solid. This doesn't have the super fast refreshing screen found on the Lumia 1520 and the Lumia Icon, so some of these scrolling effects can feel a little bit jerkier. But compared to any similarly priced Android phone, performance has been outstanding. It's smooth, it's quick, and it's only in the occasional scroll through things like the notification tray that you're going to notice any distinct lag. Now, I don't know if and when there will be an official Windows Phone 8.1 update for the 1320 on Cricket. I'm just not familiar enough with that carrier to know how they support their phones, especially with OTAs. But using the developer preview of 8.1 Update 1, I've had full access to all of the newest features in Windows Phone. So even on this less powerful hardware, we still have access to things like the driving mode, which can automatically pair Bluetooth speakers and then engage in voice-activated prompts for things like phone calls and text messages. And going through Cortana, it really does help make sure that you keep your eyes on the road as opposed to constantly glancing back down at your smartphone for every little alert and notification that comes your way. And even the basics are well covered, as this has a pretty decently loud headphone jack, and we have all of the stereo and EQ enhancements for our audio. So if you like to get in there and tweak your audio settings, or if you just want to flip on Dolby for when you're listening to music or watching movies, you have access to those features as well. And plenty of support for gestures like flip to silence. And happily, you can still dig into settings like adjusting your color profile. This has been a pretty decent 720p screen. I haven't had any serious issues with brightness or with wonky color. I, of course, am a huge fan of AMOLED displays where the contrast ratio is a little bit nicer, and there are definitely times where you can kind of see that blacks are not quite black, they're a little bit more gray. You've got to temper those expectations against the price point this thing sells for. If you're a fan of Nokia hardware, you of course know that there is a terrific high sensitivity mode where you can actually use this phone with gloves on. And like I demonstrated before, this phone does support tap to wake. Again, just a nice ergonomic consideration considering that you might not always be holding this thing in a way where your thumb is going to reach this power button. So the ability to double tap real quick to turn the screen on is always welcome. It's just really enjoyable performance, even getting into something like multitasking, where you can go through the apps that are currently running on the system and you can easily flick some of them away if you want to get rid of them, or jump right back into where you left off on another piece. And for any apprehension I might have felt in using a budget phone long term, Windows Phone actually does a pretty good job of ironing out some of my concerns. Plus, running the developer preview, we have access to Cortana, which runs surprisingly well on a budget phone. Although sometimes you just need to kick back and have a good chuckle. Tell me a joke.
Two antennas got married. The ceremony dragged on, but the reception was excellent.
Oh, Cortana, you saucy minx, you. Where there's definitely a compromise on the 1320 is in built-in storage. This thing's gonna ship with 8 gigabytes of storage out of the box, which really, after formatting and doing the math, is really only 7.2 gigabytes of storage. And out of the box, the system is going to take up around 2 gigabytes of storage, so you have even less room to play with built into this device. However, like its big brother, the 1520, we do have the ability to add a micro SD card. And even though the 1320 is a little bit older, it will support cards up to 64 gigabytes in size. And I gotta say, I actually kinda dig the removable backplate on the 1320. When it's snapped on the back of the phone, I actually think it's a slightly cleaner experience than what we have on the 1520. I'm still not a really big fan of these pin tool doors that you have to pop open to get access to the SIM card and the memory card. And they have just this little bit of a rattle or a jiggle to them that I don't think is very pleasant on a flagship device. Now, where you certainly don't have any compromises is on the battery. Even though it's not removable, you have a 3,400 milliamp hour battery built into the back of the 1320. And when you factor in the low power internals and the lower resolution screen, I have easily been able to get 2-day battery life out of this phone. Camera performance has been pretty solid, especially considering the price this phone sells for. I'm starting to sound like a broken record player. We have a 1/4-inch sensor on the back of this phone, which is a little bit smaller than some of the recent sensors that we've played with. And there is no image stabilization built into this lens to save on costs, but we do have this terrific Nokia camera app, which is still one of my favorite camera apps to use. Very quickly, with one little flick on this camera button, we have full access to exposure control, shutter speed, ISO, manual focus, even white balance, all very easily and quickly adjustable from this main window, and then one little flick and they all go back away. And the video actually looks pretty decent. Definitely check out our camera review on this phone because we went through the entire test suite of different real-world shooting scenarios that we do on all of our phones. Bright outdoor light, low light scenes, tracking movement. And I would definitely say that this phone outperforms many of its competitors at similar or higher price points. And we also have our Smart Sequence, which takes a burst of photos and allows you to do creative editing tricks to them. Of course, I'm not shooting anything particularly exciting, but if I hit this, does that little round ring, and it just locked down 10 photos that I can flip through to make sure that I've got the best possible shot from that sequence, or to also do action shots if I want sort of a montage of photos going across. It's also really handy for those of you who like to try and create little action GIFs. Again, it's just impressive to see features like this still supported on phones this cheap. I really didn't know what to expect when I got the 1320. The specs on paper make it look like it's going to be a really compromised device. And we've recently heard word from Microsoft that all Windows Phone 8 devices will be rolled into a Windows 10 update whenever that's made available. It's a nice little peace of mind if you're looking for a budget experience that you're not going to be left out in the cold in a couple months. When this phone was first announced, I was kind of bummed that there weren't many carriers jumping on board in the United States to support this phone, so I'm really happy to see that Cricket has brought the 1320 to our shores. And those of you shopping that large screen phablet experience, but you don't want to break the bank, I would certainly recommend putting this phone near the top of your list. But of course, I want to hear from you guys, as I'm not really the biggest fan of phablets in general. I'm always curious to hear from you folks what draws you to the larger screens. And then also, what have your experiences been on shopping entry-level devices? So definitely drop me some comments down below. I love getting into that kind of discussion. As always, folks, thanks so much for watching my videos, subscribing to this channel, and I would not be able to continue producing reviews like this if you folks weren't out there sharing my videos with your family, friends, and on social media. Hit that thumbs up button, and I will catch you all on the next review.